It is an unfortunate yet inevitable truth that most Magic cards don't matter outside of their limited environment. And at the rate sets are released, that means most Magic players never look very closely at most Magic cards. And that's a shame, because Wizards of the Coast hires a phenomenal group of artists to illustrate every set. And a lot of those cards deserve more appreciation than they get. So, today, let's look at some of the cards in Aetherdrift, primarily commons and uncommons, that contain artistic brilliance or cool world building elements that you might have missed. Let's start with Glitch Ghost Surveyor. At card size, or at the size Arena displays cards during draft, all I really perceived on this card was the figure in the foreground, the Glitch Ghost. But when I looked at this zoomed in on Scryfall, there's a human figure there. And it seems like the ghost is coming out of that figure. So is this portraying the actual death of one of the racers and then turning into a ghost? That sure is what it seems like. On top of that, there are enormous tentacles, which seem responsible for whatever has happened here. And you know where else we see gigantic tentacles? The vanilla uncommon Keelhauler Coral Tyrant, which in its art is breaking apart part of the raceway in a way that makes it look very Hot Wheels, like a playset. I don't love that element of it, but it is cool that we seem to have multiple cards referencing this story element, this octopus attack that isn't really in the story and isn't in the Planeswalker's Guide. It just doesn't happen anywhere except here on these two cards, and then again on Memory Guardian. You look in the background lower left of that, we have more tentacles grappling one of the Guidelight Voyager's vehicles, presumably that the main character in this one is escaping from. And so in that way, I think we're kind of getting a glimpse of what must be in the style guide, because all the people doing creative work on the set are presumably, given a style guide by Wizards creative staff, and they published one or two of those in the distant past. I think maybe the Zendikar style guide for the original Zendikar, but generally those are not documents that we, the public, are allowed to see. But I think this is a case where we can kind of read behind the lines that, yeah, they described that somewhere along the race, Keelhauler gets in everyone's business and tears stuff up. And so we see that across multiple cards, and that's really cool. And I'm wondering if there are even more cards that feature this incident. If I have missed any, please let me know. Looping back to the Glitch Ghost Surveyor, something was tickling the back of my mind about the lore as presented in the Duskborn Planeswalker's Guide, about how glitch ghosts were formed by Valgavoth's version of reality pressing out the former reality, and the glitch ghosts being glitchy because they got squeezed and had to squeeze back through the cracks. So I went back and referenced that guide. Not only that, it says glitch ghosts are all deceased before Valgavoth's ascension. So yeah, the whole thing about them getting squeezed is correct, but it was only the ghosts that already were ghosts before that. So it does not seem true that a person from Duskmorn, particularly who dies on another plane like Muruganda, where this octopus attack presumably is, turns into a glitch ghost. That shouldn't be a thing that happens. And so now I'm wondering, were they both members of the racing team, both this glitch ghost and this human who died in this octopus attack? Or is this actually just a mistake, a creative mistake, where someone thought it would be cool to have a glitch ghost, but didn't sync that up with the actual canon lore about how glitch ghosts came to be? And that sounds like a complaint, and I guess it kind of is, but it's really more of just a cool thing to dig into. Because you can explain this away as, oh, they were just two members of the team if it really bothers you. But then that also got me thinking about what is a surveyor in the context of racing? Because this is part of a cycle. There is a common in each color that is a surveyor that has this common ability of when you reach max speed, you can pay 3 and exile it from your graveyard to draw a card. And I'm not really familiar with racing in general, so I Googled it and I found references to surveyors being involved in designing tracks. But per the Planeswalker's Guide to Aetherdrift, it seems like either just representatives from Avishkar designed the track, or perhaps they, with collaboration from Muragondan and Amonkhet delegations, did that work. And besides, it'd be weird for these cards to represent things that happen before the actual set occurs, before the race occurs. So I think the implication is that a surveyor is more like a scout. They're a member of a team who goes out looking for problems that the racer is going to encounter and try and head those off. And that seems pretty consistent, at least as a hypothesis, with what the other surveyors portray. And so then, does that plausibly explain what this character is doing? Yeah, I guess maybe they were trying to look out for trouble ahead and messed up in this case. On to a simpler one, Ooze Patrol. When I glanced at this the first time, I said, oh yeah, I know the oozes they absorb other life forms and they can kind of take different shapes. And this one's, hey, it's an ooze that shaped itself into a car. But looking at this one zoomed in, also has the cool element of, it has a driver who happens to be a skeleton. But the reason I'm including in the list today is the wheels. Look at these things. They're a bunch of hands. Can you imagine the sound that thing makes with those things just slapping on the road? That cracks me up. I like that. Another one, same type of situation. When I see crash and burn at card size, I just think, oh, there's a crash and explosion happening, and I kind of shortcut to all the machinery that I'm seeing on this card that's all part of one large vehicle breaking apart. And there are multiple parts of I think a Voyager's glide car breaking apart in the foreground, but in the background, that's not part of that same machine breaking up. That's a goblin racer, and it's got these two goblins up on like tent poles, and there's something connecting them. It's a slingshot. They have slingshotted something into this Guidelight Voyager's vehicle, and that's what this object in the foreground is. This little splash of pink here, that's like a goblin mouth painted on just a big old projectile slug or something. And then you can see one little Guidelight Voyager hanging on here up at the top. So there's just all this stuff going on in this card that I didn't notice at first. Next, I want to look at the card Locust Spray. And there is a cool thing about what's in the foreground of the card, which is the wheels of the Speed Brood. Most of their vehicles, they look like little pill bugs rolled up, and I like that a lot. But what really strikes me in this one is what's in the background. And I didn't notice this for a number of times looking at this, but look at that enormous ship in the background. It's huge. And at first I thought, okay, maybe the Speed Brood are insects. Maybe this car is actually tiny. Maybe it's like a size of a remote control car. But no, off to the right, there's a full-size shark, Cordotan, in a Keelhauler's vessel, which is more like a kayak to that shark. But like, okay, so that's a full-size shark. So this is like the size of a real sailing ship just looming in the background with this enormous shark mouth painted on it, which is, I don't know, that's kind of extra funny that sharks are painting shark mouths on their vehicles. And I don't think we see that on any of the other cards, but that's actually a tradition from our reality that goes back to World War I fighter planes. So that's a neat reference to include here. But so I assume if we have small racing vehicles for the Chordotans, for the Keelhaulers, that are just the size of one racer, and we also have this enormous one, that must be like their flagship. And there is at least one more card that portrays a vessel of that size, and that's Plow Through. Once again, was playing with this card for a week or two, and I knew there was an explosion there and that something was bursting through, but looking zoomed in, the thing bursting through is a goblin buggy, and there is someone with just arms raised high, having a great time bursting through there, and the vessel itself appears to be, a ship, so it's got to be another Keelhauler's vessel, or the same one that we see in the background on Locust Spray. But perhaps the best part of Plow Through is the expression on this shark on the left side. This set is full of sharks making funny faces, making really expressive faces. I love it. I absolutely love it. I am here for it. But I've mentioned the word Chordotans a couple times, and that's what the Planeswalker's Guide says these shark people are. I think the first one we saw was Lone Shark back in Thunder Junction, and we were promised as of Thunder Junction that we would see more representatives of some of the new races and representatives from the planes who were presented there. Well, here are the rest of the shark people, or at least some of the shark people, and again, the Planeswalker's Guide calls them Chordotans. That's kind of thrown me, because Chordata is an English word, or at least maybe it's a Latin word. It's a scientific word for a phylum of animals, and that includes all birds, all reptiles, and all mammals. Us. We're also Chordotans in that sense. So it's weird to me that they chose that word to represent the shark people in the Magic universe. I presume that term is going to follow them through the multiverse in the same sense that we say like a humanoid elephant is a Loxodon, which we'll come back to shortly. But there are a few other Keelhauler cards that I think are really worth pointing out. One is Broadside Barrage. It has more of these shark people making just amazing expressions. Well, this one in the upper left here has a hood on. What's that about? But I love it. I love that grin. And then here on the lower right, there's more of like a catfish kind of expression, wearing something like a sombrero. It's wild. It's great. And then we have one with an eye patch. But the thing that is perhaps most interesting about this one is there's a little white monkey there. Where else do we see a monkey like that? And I thought, hey, could that be a Ragavan cameo? Nah, surely not. But no, the Planeswalker's Guide actually specifies that Karizev and Ragavan are racing with the Keelhaulers. So that's them. How cool is that? But then there's also a lot of non-sharks among the Keelhaulers, and the Planeswalker's Guide does mention that as well. A crew of humanoid sharks called Chordotans, and their air-breathing fishfolk and human comrades. So look at Keen Buccaneer. It's just wild. It's supposed to be an octopus pirate. That's its type line. And it's very much an embodiment of the 3X in a trench coat meme, because that does not look like the shape of an octopus. I mean, it's wearing person clothes, so its silhouette is kind of person shaped, but you can see this tentacle flipping out of the front of its jacket and grabbing the sword kind of from behind it. It's just great. I love this. The more I look at it, the weirder and more fun it looks. And then you've got just bonus cute robots. I think they're cute. They're certainly interesting in the background over to the right. So this image is just full of little joys. Another bit of joy to me is the fashion of these sharks. Thunderhead Gunner. Look at this guy. This art to me feels like a Star Wars space fight scene, like in Return of the Jedi, when you have all those enormous capital ship fights going on toward the end of the movie, and you're cutting back and forth between Admiral Akbar and all these other characters in their cockpits and everything. This picture just conjures that energy to me. I can almost hear like a John Williams score in my mind. And once again, the expression on this face is amazing. This is another one that I'm not sure is actually a shark. It's typed as shark, but it kind of resembles a catfish. But I will trust that it's a variety of shark. I'm not fully fluent on all the varieties of sharks. I apologize. But look at those pants. Those puffy, ballooned out, pinstriped pants. I guess they kind of have a Victorian air to them. They're fantastic. I love them. And you know who else is wearing them? The captain. Captain Howler Sea Scourge. These two pieces beside each other, they're great. They're some fun madness. But what I think might be the most beautiful piece of Keelhauler's art, and maybe the most beautiful character art in this set, is the Scrounging Skyray. And I just adore the texture in this piece. It's loaded down with weapons. It's got a lot of weapons, and that's fun, and I think that's the scrounging part, and that's ties in with the flavor text. So that's all a nice package. But the reason that I can't stop looking at it is the texture. The skin has a almost reflective lightness that makes it seem kind of moist, which seems really fitting for Array. I think there's something subtle that Ron Spears did here that draws your eye starting from the upper left down to the lower right, which I think is what at least Western readers tend to do anyway. But look at the thicker lines on this blade that the Skyray is holding with their right hand up in the upper left of the art. There are these extra thick black outlines there, almost comic book-esque inked lines that aren't really present anywhere else in the art, whereas the contrast in the lower right with that other blade is significantly less. It's closer to matching with the background, and I think that's just really effective. And it kind of also the tilt of the perspective gives you this sense of soaring or falling. I just can't stop looking at this one. But on to the next. Not many rares that I've included here. As I mentioned, a large motivation for episodes like these is to focus on the commons and uncommons that aren't going to get appreciated after this set rotates out of limited. But Seat of Varma, I think, is worth examining a little bit more closely. And that's mainly because of a tie-in with the last world building article that was released, the Legends of Aetherdrift article, where they use for the first time, I'm pretty sure, the actual term Aetherdrift within the world building of the set. And they use that to describe this state that Seat of Varma enters when she uses this suit that Pia Nalaar developed and gave to her, which I guess injects ether into her body, but it basically makes her act like the Flash for a few seconds. But of course, a few seconds is time to do a lot of things when you're moving like the Flash. Okay, and here's the other piece of art that is challenging the Skyray for my favorite piece of character art in this set. Oh, the Nesting Bot. I absolutely love everything Rakrufi has done for Magic, which hasn't been much. It's been a couple of bots in this set, and then a bunch of gnomes from Caverns of Ixalan. But that was enough that I went off-site and looked up Rakrufi, who is Raul Cruz from Mexico City, and they have a long history of creating art featuring mechanical elements, robots, cyborgs, that have sort of a sci-fi fantasy feel, and their work is just beautiful. The textures, in this case, because we are looking at actual robots. It's metallic textures. But if you look back at their work with the gnomes from Ixalan and just a lot of the other work, a lot of them are stone-based robots, and the texture work there is phenomenal, but the texture work here is also phenomenal. And the other thing that might impress me the most is the low contrast background versus the high contrast foreground, which you'll see a lot of artists do that to draw your focus to what's in the foreground. That's not terribly uncommon at all. But in this case, it feels like we almost get two entire pieces of art here, because the low contrast background has this Guidelights bike that has a completely separate bot driving it. And I can sort of see that vehicle in its entirety through what's in the foreground. But what's in the foreground also has elements that I just didn't perceive at card size. It's pretty clear that there's a small bot bursting out of this larger body, and that absolutely makes sense with the flavor of the card, where when the first version dies, you get a token bot afterwards. But what I didn't notice until I was zoomed in was this face on the right side of the main chassis. And look, it's got these red eyes and facial features, like it's errored out. It's so tragic. I love these robots so much. But Rakrufi also in this set illustrated the Thopter Fabricator, a rare. Not trying to focus on the rares, but this one's interesting in two ways. One, it is once again just stunningly beautiful. The texture, the use of light, the way it glows, it's so whimsical while being so mechanical. But the other interesting world building element it brings in here is an elephant pilot. Now this looks like a vehicle from the Avishkari team. The Ether Rangers, right? So the Avishkari home team is the Ether Rangers. Judging from the aesthetic of the vehicle, it seems pretty obvious that that's the team it's a part of. I mean, it's obviously not part of the Speed Demons, or what are the other blue ones? The Keelhaulers, obviously not. And it's not a Guidelight Voyager. It's not a robot. Well, at least the captain, the pilot, is not a robot. So, are elephants Loxodon now part of Avishkar? And it seems like they are. I looked back to the Kaladesh and Ether Revolt sets to double check, and there are no Loxodon there. There is the Greenbelt Rampager and the Bastion Mastodon, which is it's a construct. It's a mechanical replica of an elephant, but they're not Loxodon. They don't seem sentient. And then there was a Fairgrounds Trumpeter in March of the Machine, but clearly a creature from Kaladesh, or rather, sorry, from Avishkar. And now in this set, though, we don't just get the Thopter Fabricator, but we get a creature with Loxodon in its title, Loxodon Surveyor, another of that Surveyor cycle. And if we look at it closely, its jewelry, its headdress are very clearly of Avishkari aesthetic. So that's really interesting. And then just researching this point, I found that there is also a commander card released as part of Aetherdrift called the Pima Trailblazer. And Pima is a forest on Avishkar. So apparently we have Loxodon here now. And there's one other piece of art, and this is the only alternative treatment piece of art that I'm going to bring up in this video. But the alt art for the Marshall's Path Cruiser has both a Loxodon character featured, but also shows the Path Cruiser itself being modeled off of Loxodon or elephant physiology, with sort of two sets of tusks, and it's quadrupedal and sort of has the same size and relative dimensions of limbs as an elephant. So I thought that was really cool, and a nice expansion to the lore of Avishkar. Here is another card that gives us additional insight beyond what was clearly presented in the stories, and that's Our Victory. So the story is very clear about Amonkhet taking first place. It sets up how Winter starts struggling toward the finish line, seems to be the only one paying attention to the fact that the race is still going, despite this huge tumult and revolution or counter-revolution seeming to happen. And then suddenly, the spoilers, Amonkhet team just burst through and crosses the finish line. But they don't really mention who got any other places. But look at Our Victory. We see the Amonkhet racers celebrating and hoisting up the Aetherspark, but there's also two other banners here. To the left, there is the Avishkar logo icon, and to the right is the Alacrian Speed Racers. And there are also the representatives of those teams there. There's Caradora, who we can recognize standing on Lagoran, her mount. Both of them have their own cards. And then that is Seat of Arma. And we can also see these same figures in Push the Limit, which is the illustration of that scene where we have Winter in the upper left despairing and falling down. I have a lot to say about that, but that's going to be a different video. It's a whole diatribe. But we see the Amonkhet team in the lead with their hippos in very, very poor shape. The flavor of the card is that all these vehicles return from your graveyard, and we can see that here. It looks like the hippos suffered mightily, presumably in the ambush on Muraganda, which is described in the stories. And I'm not sure how the Curse of Wandering is supposed to work when you're not on Amonkhet. I think that was also sort of alluded to in one of the stories, but it's not clear to me exactly what the mechanisms are and if they can administer some rights, regardless of where they are, if they're from Amonkhet and still come back. But these hippos certainly seem to be moving despite having sustained some lethal tusk wounds. But again, we see Seat of Arma on the left with her Aetherdrift chemtrails coming out, and on the right, or rather the upper right, we have Caradora riding Lagoran. So I guess that definitively tells us that Amonkhet took the gold, but the Alacrians took the silver, and the home team, Avishkar, Aether Rangers, took the bronze. Before we move on completely from Winter, though, I won't entirely get into my rant here. Maybe a little bit. Let's look at Wretched Doll. Creepy toys, certainly a thing in Duskmourn, and we have a couple of them here as well. But this one is one that at card size, I could see, yeah, this is obviously a creepy doll, like it says on the tin, and it looks like Winter. And the flavor text is from Winter, attributed to Winter. But zooming in, you see that a demon is behind the main figure, presumably the speed demon. And now I'm thinking maybe this isn't a doll who resembles Winter, especially in conjunction with the quote, "Lots of folks on Duskmourn are more scared of dying than what comes after. Oh, how wrong they are." I think this probably is Winter, but there seems to be conflicting information between the Planeswalker's Guide and the Legends of article about what state Winter is in when he's in the race and what state he's in after the race. In that one seems to imply he's alive and the other calls him a revenant, and that strongly implies he's already dead. In any case, the speed demon seems to be puppeteering him around here in a very unpleasant fashion. And one more piece of Duskmourn-centric art that I want to look at is the Wickerfolk Indomitable. And this is one that at card size, I really couldn't make out what I was looking at. It's a big mass of dark spooky. And zoomed in, it's also kind of a big mass of dark spooky. I really had problems making out the details, but I zoomed in even more because I really wanted to know. And in the foreground, it looks like we have an Amonkhet racer who is being overtaken, and this Wickerfolk is surrounding it with both arms, and we can see bones at the center of the Wickerfolk. Now, the Wickerfolk lore, per the Duskmourn Planewalker's Guide, is that these start off as humans or humanoids who get encased in wicker and cursed to forever suffer as Wickerfolk. It didn't occur to me that that would thus lead to a state where there was just a skeleton left inside the Wickerfolk. Seeing this, I thought that's weird. And also, if you look really closely, and this is the detail that was hardest for me to make out, there is a skull kind of with extra blue light trailing off of it here. But as I was saying, I kind of thought it odd that there's just a skeleton still wandering around in here. I guess I thought they were more like fleshy zombies inside of the scarecrow bodies. But then I went back and looked at the Duskmourn art, and a number of those also. I think the Osseous Stick Twister, the best scarecrow from that set, also has some visible bones just sort of being suspended by the wicker. So I guess that's just how their anatomy works, if you needed to know. But let's wrap up with a much lighter subtopic. Pictures of peace, just life in Avishkar, not during a death race. And we have two illustrations of this. The Market Back Walker gives it to us at the macro scale, and it is another just beautiful piece. This glow and this yellow and blue motif is just peaceful and beautiful, and it's got these legs that it seems to be moving around on. I love that. But then Stock Up, the blue uncommon, seems to give us a really zoomed in look at the same type of scene, where we have two figures. One is a robotic vendor, and the other is a customer who's buying a bunch of food. And that's just, it's a delightful thing to see. And there's a lot of cool elements the longer you look at the robotic vendor that become apparent. The coolest being at the bottom, you see some little legs. So I'm guessing this is like a mobile cart kiosk that it just walks around and vends. It's really neat looking. It might be horrific if it existed in real life, but this isn't real life. This is on Avishkar, on magical rectangles that we get to play with. So I love it in this context. And then one more card I want to look at, not because there's anything in particular that you might have missed. It's just that it's so stunningly beautiful. And this is Curse Cloth Wrappings. It also happens to be an absolute bomb in Limited, which I happened to luck into getting many times, but I loved it before it chose me. It's a wonderful example of a really different art style too. It is, full of symbolism and sort of geometric shapes rather than a realistic depiction of a scene. But I don't think it really requires more explanation. Just look at it. It's stunning. And that is all I have for you today. If you think I've missed something, I'd love to hear about it in the comments or at Blue Sky. I'll leave the link in the video description. And I want to give a special shout out to Scryfall, because everyone should realize they are just a crucial pillar of the Magic community. They do phenomenal work. But the particularly interesting thing that happened recently that you may not be aware of is the Magic Wiki moved off of Wikia. It's still out there. Don't go there now. Go to Scryfall. They are hosting the Magic Wiki. That is where all of the active contributors are working on it. And it is phenomenal. It is so clean and ad-free, and it's wonderful. So thanks to Scryfall for everything they've been doing, but also in particular for hosting this. Thanks to the administrators of the MTG Wiki for the great work you do. It really enables people to enjoy the game and the world of the game, but also creators like me to do research for this type of video in a relatively efficient way. Additionally, you may have noticed over the past few years, since Wizards of the Coast archived a bunch of their articles, or rather they didn't archive them, they just simply removed them from the website. And so a bunch of the links from the Magic Wiki would lead to 404 page not found. And you just couldn't find those. But they were archived on the Internet Archive, and Max Makes Magic created a tool which has now gone through and updated all the links on the Magic Wiki. So once again, we have the ability to look through this incredible treasure trove of world building resources that have been published over the course of the game's life. So thank you to everyone involved in all of that process for keeping those resources out there and up to date for us.
Our world died, but we survived. Funny how it's the opposite view.